All right. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Afternoon. We just want to welcome everyone to the Pastors Roundtable.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's good to see you guys, man. How's the week been?
Well, this week has been eventful. It has been eventful. We've had a lot of historic things that happened this week, especially with, I'm not here to talk about politics, but it's historic. Where we have a African-American as the vice.
Not an African-American, an Africa-Jamaican.
Miss Camilla.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out, man.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, especially in light of all that we've been talking about these last couple of weeks. And then I think the biggest story out of it is the story that talks about forgiveness and overlooking your enemy, because, she was his biggest enemy, and he was willing to still choose her. And that I thought was that I thought is the biggest story here to me, that we can still be friends even if we tussle in the sandbox. Come on now.
It's one of the great things that Mrs. Harris is going to do with.
All right. So hey, we started this series this month, you guys, with on mission and structure. We're looking at the intersection of Adventist mission with the Adventist structure, the structure of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we started last week when we started talking about the financial structure of the church. So how did you guys think it went? What did your takeaways from last week? Oh, look, and before you guys answer, we want to invite our crowd, our audience. If you're on our audience, listen, you do not want to miss this discussion today, and you've got a friend that you don't want to miss this discussion today. So while we're doing this prelim here, go ahead and share this. We invite you to share this on your timeline, share this to people that need to hear it. Tag your pastor, tag your conference administrator, whatever it is, tag them so that they can be a part of this discussion day, which we're going to tell you about in just a minute. But do that now so they have some time to get on, and then go ahead and check out that we're also broadcasting on the YouTube channel. We want you those of you that are on the YouTube channel to go ahead and share that link with folk so that they do not miss what is coming up. I guarantee you do not want to miss what's coming up in just a few minutes. So go ahead and do that now as we talk a little bit about what went on last week. So Dr. Henry, how did it feel? What's your takeaway?
Listen, I think last week was excellent. When we brought the CFOs on, and they talked about the financial, distribution in the church. And they also spoke about what they could do differently. I thought that was really appealing to me. If they had the latitude to do something differently, here are some things I could do differently. And so I thought that was just amazing on their transparency. And I think I learned also from last week that, and I think I said this in the promo as well, the greatest room in the world is room for improvement. Mm-hmm. So I think that even our treasurers from our different levels within our organization, they're looking for ways to be more effective in the distribution of funds.
I think what was really cool, Raj, is that they all seem to own that. They all seem to be, and for those of you that missed last week, we had the treasurer from one of our largest conferences in North America, which is the Florida Conference. We Miss Elisa Raming. We had the treasurer from Union, which was Elias Zabalas, if I said that right. That's from the treasurer from the Atlantic Union. And then we also had the treasurer for the NAD, Randy Roberts. And all of them, not Roberts, Robert Robinson, yes. Mm-hmm. They were all, Roger, willing to say, there's a lot of room for improvement. What did you think about that?
I thought that was a awesome opportunity to see our leaders. Some of them we don't really connect with, those who sit in the pew. So they were able to hear directly from the treasurers and actually put to bed some myths. But the biggest takeaway for me was when it was shared that when I place my dollar in my local church's offering, it is impacting not only my local church, but my local region and the global world. That's what our structure does. It's not that our dollar has to, some people think we need to keep our dollars only to this one area or this one situation. Our financial structure actually helps the message and the mission around the world. And so I have a part in that. And that kind of helps me to connect to the over 11, I think it's 11 million Adventists around the world that are part of this wonderful.
Yeah, that's what 21 million.
21 million around the world that are part of this this wonderful message and this wonderful church that we're a part of.
On the books.
On the books.
Well, listen, I know that we have a good show today.
Yes.
So, Paul, what's on the table today?
Listen, today on the table we're going to be talking about the structure, ethnic structures in the church. Now, when we put that term out during the week, I always scratch my head and wonder, are people really going to know what we're talking about when we use that term, ethnic structure? So let me just put it out there in black and white. The pun, very much intended. The ethnic structures that we have, and particularly in North America, we're talking about the idea of regional conferences. When I was growing up, there was no such thing as a regional conference. It was a black conference and a white conference. That's what we're talking about. There are these structures within the church, and particularly in North America, where there are structures that are based around ethnicity. So you've got regional conferences, which is another name for black conferences, or it used to be that, and we'll get into dealing with that. But it's not just that. So we've also got a historically black college. We've got black schools, and we've got black churches. We have Korean churches. We have Spanish churches. We've got all of those are ethnic structures within the North American division. And so that's what we want to talk about, because we've heard a lot of things as of late, people questioning why do we have them? Should we still have them? All of those things. So that's what's on the table. We're going to address that issue today.
All right. Well, Pastor Wade, who's at the table?
And I am so blessed to be around greatness, not only among my hosts, but today we have some very dynamic leaders of our church. And I want to quickly say that each one of them I consider my good friend. And so let's begin. First of all, we want to welcome back to the show Dr. Leslie Pollard from the Oakwood University. He was my professor, and our professor actually, and so he is graciously accepted to be here to help us unravel this topic. We also have with us Jose Cortez Jr., who serves at the North American Division in the Ministerial Department as the Associate Ministerial Director. And I had the privilege of serving alongside with him as a youth director in the Atlantic Union. And we got ourselves into a lot of trouble there, Jose. And then Jose became my boss. He became my boss as the Union Youth Director. Well, you know, we still worked it out. And now he moved on up, and we are just so excited to have him join us today to share in this discussion. And then another one of my bosses. I have admired Pastor Ricardo Graham, Elder Graham, who now serves as the president of the Pacific Union Conference in the West Coast. And he became one of those icons that showed me as an African American that we can move up the structure and do ministry with all kinds of people and people group. And so he has shown that to me, and we have been good friends. We share every now and then. We share things on Facebook and stuff. So I'm excited to have him here with you. So Dr. Graham, Dr. Cortez, and Dr. Pollard, thank you so much for being with us here at the round table. Let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll jump right into it. Father, once again, we thank you for your love, your mercy, and your grace. And today, Lord, you have assembled this august group of leaders, of thinkers, of your church, and we are asking you now to use them, work through them, and share with us what you want us to hear, what you want our viewers to hear, and we will be very careful to give you the glory, honor, and praise. We pray this prayer in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Just before we jump into that first question, Pastor Wade, I want to remind our audience that you can engage this conversation as well. We want to invite you to post your questions. Sometimes we aren't able to get to all of them, but we try to get to them even later on in the week. So go ahead and post your questions in the chat. Some of you are chatting on Facebook. Some of you are doing it on YouTube. We invite that. We want to know where you guys are watching from. And I think it might be interesting as well to let us know if you are watching from a state conference, if your home conference is a state conference or a regional conference. Just shout out your home church, your home conference. That's going to be intriguing for us to know. So we're interested to hear from you in that regard. Tiffany Brissett is already saying she would like to see more women on our panel. That we're working on that.
How did we fall into this?
I know. With all of the stuff that's been floating out there, we did it again.
But listen. We got to be honest.
This is not cool.
We have a number of women lined up. It's their schedule. They are so
You're better.
They are doing so many other shows. We are just low man on the totem pole. So let's our viewers just be reminded that we are trying, and they're not as free as we thought they were going to be.
Yes, indeed. All right.
Okay, so we're just here because they were not able to make it.
Well, if the truth be told,
let's go with that. Let's go with that.
Okay, I feel better now. I feel better.
Just standing in for others.
Yeah. So anyway, So listen, we are excited about this topic of structure and mission and how it intersects. But one of the things we want to really make sure that our members understand, our viewers understand, is what is the mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. As it is when we look at it organizationally or even biblically, because that helps us to understand these ethnic structures and kind of ask the right questions instead of assuming certain questions. So who wants to jump in and get us started on the mission and of the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Keep in mind that our folks know that Revelation 14 and Matthew 28 are the biblical basis, but there may be some other nuances that we need to keep in mind.
Can I start with a nuance, perhaps?
Sure.
The Bible is pretty much in red in my Bible, which means that Jesus said it. He said that the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Okay, so I would love to think that the mission of our church in North America is to love, to seek, and to save those who are lost. And that's pretty biblical. Luke 19, Matthew 18. Of course, making disciples. Once you save them, you want to make them disciples. And one thing that is really important, and I think that we get it from Jesus, we get it also from Revelation 14, is that it is for all. Okay, it is for all. The message to the three angels is for all nations, all tribes, all languages, all races. So I would love to think that the mission of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America is to love, to seek, to save, to disciple all people. Okay, all people, not just a few, not just one from here, one from there, but all people. I would love to think that that's part of our mission, or that's our mission, to continue what Jesus left when he came to this earth.
In addition, may I add that our prophet Ellen White said that the mission field is the world. So we're to reach the world and all the inhabitants. It's a global movement that obviously encapsulates where we live, the North American division, and all the people who live therein. That's our local territory. We must reach everyone in the neighborhoods, the barrios, all parts of our cities where we live and breathe and have our being.
So may I just add, in addition to my colleagues, and I ditto everything they've said, the mission has to go globally, but not just individually. In Matthew chapter 28, he says, "Go ye therefore and teach all nations." And that word ta ethne, the word for nations, we think about ethnic groups. So not only are we trying to reach individuals, but we're also trying to reach people groups in the language and in the modalities and in the mores that they understand. Now that's vital to our conversation today, because any discussion about mission has to also account for the intersections of culture and race and gender and class and all
language.
Other elements. And that's when it begins to get more complex, because when we say we're going to reach the world, that's a global statement. But now when I have to reach a group of Visayan speakers in the Philippines, now I may need some methods that I may not use if I'm talking to persons in South Korea. I may need different methods.
And I think if I can follow up to what Leslie just said, that we need to create that distinction when we're reaching people, when we're trying to help work in partnership with God to save people, that we are evangelizers, we're not colonizers. In other words, when we come in, we come in with the gospel, not with our culture and with our personal traditions. I think that's really, really important that as we frame our conversation.
And that presupposes, if I may add, just as writing on this stream of conscious thought here, that may mean that we need a multiplicity of modalities that are demanded by the local context which we seek to take this message.
True. And so what I'm sensing is that there is a opportunity to reach multiple people, but then the question then rises, how do you do that in time? Well, we have a structure that helps us to drive this message. Is the structure really, I think Dr. Pollard, you and I, we talked about this in our group about an adaptive structure throughout history. Is our structure helping us to carry the message and the mission of this church, what you all just shared, to all people? Is our structure helping us with that?
Okay, so I think the answer is yes, but I think the structures can always be improved. And the reason I think that is because, there are two kinds of theology in the church. There is the church's official theology, and then there is folk theology. What we believe, what we say, what we talk about. So in the church's official theology of structure, in 2007, a commission said, one, that organization, this is a GC group now, organizational structure is necessary to fulfill the mission of the church. Two, the Bible contains principles, not prescriptions. Three, commitment to mission is the primary determinant of structural form. Now, that's the church's official position. But often we don't talk about those things. People say, man, the church is out of touch, the church is out of touch. This is really an avant-garde statement. And I think Rick was there when this was done. This was Elder Lowell Cooper's mission group. So, and here's one of the last statements. There's 7 of them, but this is one of them. I just picked the other one. Flexibility and structure must not sacrifice unity and collective action. So that's kind of what we're talking about, the tension between those two things. What does it look like to be mission-focused, adaptive, contextual, flexible, and at the same time trying to work in a community and move a community forward at the same time? That's where our tensions have been in the last few years.
And Dr. Wade, I think what Dr. Pollard just said is excellent. But I don't know if that message has been communicated, say, to the grassroots. And if it has been communicated, has it been, 1, understood, and 2, deployed in a way that we can actually trace those concepts down to the grassroots? So thank you for sharing that. It's very powerful.
Yeah, I think that the message may have gotten lost in the fact that at times, we give the appearance, at times, I'm not saying all the time, at times we may give the appearance that we care more about the structure than we do about the mission. That we care more about preserving what we have built than we care about preserving or loving or bringing in the people that the structure was really built for.
Wow.
Okay, wow. So I think that maybe recently we may have given the impression as a church that we're more concerned about upholding and maintaining what we have rather than expanding what we have by reaching more people. Okay. And whenever we do that, whenever we give the impression that the structure, the organization is more important than the people that it is here to serve, I think that we become irrelevant. We might become useless. And it may cause for people not to hear about our great message because they might just turn off to what we have to say once they realize that we might give the impression that we're full of ourselves, if I may say that.
Sure. So many implications to that in so many different areas. This is going to be fun.
Wow. So the next question, if I may add to this, dealing with the duplication of resources and services, talking about simply trying to survive now. This is COVID-19. And so both on and off social media platforms, some have questioned the validity, effectiveness, and efficiency of duplicating conference coverage of the same territory, especially in consideration of the fiscal challenges posed by COVID-19, this pandemic. So is there a need to revisit the validity of the state and regional conferences covering the same territories?
You know, Dr. Henry, if I may respond, I'm sitting here way on the West Coast in a different time zone. Excellent presentation of that question, which presupposes a problem. The reality is that there are different targets, different goals, different focuses or foci. I'm not sure which way to say it, Les, but they're not always the same focus of the ministry intention. And so there are some groups that are not met by some conferences. It's not their particular prerogative. They want to reach everybody, but they may not be able or particularly designed to reach everybody. Now, the one volume of the current Seventh-day Adventist commentary has an encyclopedia, a one-volume encyclopedia. In that volume, there is a reference to regional conference that points out, and I'm paraphrasing here, the three benefits that did not exist prior to the implementation of regional conferences. Number one, more representation of Black people at bodies that make decisions. Union, conference, GC, so on and so forth, because those are composed of conference representatives. So now you have regional conferences, you have regional people representing the interests of those people. Number two, the training for other positions. And if you think carefully, most individuals who've gone to higher mobility in the entire denomination started in regional conferences. And then the third is that of the fact that the regional conferences, when they began to operate, reached confines that no one else reached in our cities. And some of those facts and some of those realities continue to exist today. We have an emphasis on reaching the cities. Well, African American churches have always been in the cities. We've never operated in the suburbs. We have been there. We have always had mission to the cities, because that's where our people are. Just like the bank robber back in the 20s was a Dillinger who was asked, why did he rob banks? That's where the money is. Why do we put our church in the city? That's where our people are.
Why would you rob anything else, huh?
That's where our people are. So
we come to my house.
Always operated in the city when others have preferred nice, pristine places. I'm sorry that I'm getting a little excited. I haven't preached in a while. Please forgive me.
Anyway, we'll talk after the broadcast. We'll get together.
And I'm on with Rick all the way. Rick and Jose. May I ask the question in a different way, just for the thinking part of it? So I lived and worked at Loma Linda for 14 years. Now, within a 15-mile radius of the Loma Linda University and the Medical Center, there are, Rick, the last time we checked, about 33 churches.
Yep.
Now, let me ask you a question. Is that a duplication of services? Now, stop and think about that. We got 33 churches. You got, and I had to go because of my work in diversity, I had to go to all of them. So Chinese church 1 week, Japanese church 1 week, Filipino church, 2 kinds, both Tagalog and Visayan. 2 kinds of Filipino churches. Nobody ever asks the question, why is there so much duplication? And it's what Rick said. The reason it's not duplication is because the mission targets are different. The targets are different. And so you have duplication when you look at the mass conglomerates. It's called, I did the MBA, so it's called market segmentation, if we want to use business language. You segment the market and then you target it.
That's right.
And now the question becomes for me on this question. So what are the resources needed to be effective? And we talked a little bit about this last night. Now, we can evaluate what those metrics look like, what it should be, how we can improve that, whether it's time to revisit all of those things. But the reality becomes, what are the resources needed to accomplish this part of the mission?
So Doc, if I may, and I told myself,
then you begin to move into resource allocation, both human and financial. You begin to move into those kinds of conversations with a focus on mission. Okay, so that's my.
Dr. Pollard, there's a question that came, I think, on your comment there from Rachel Josil Moody, who's asking, were those churches in different conferences as well?
Were those churches in California?
Yes.
No, there's one conference.
Okay. So, and I think her point was to highlight the issue that the question had to do with conferences covering the same territories and the duplications that you have in that context. So I think she was probably responding to that part of the question.
So may I respond to her response? May I do
sure.
that? Okay.
Yes.
So even if I always start with the local unit as the church, because again, it's a concrete example of some of the aspects of what we're talking about. So when we talk about conferences, it's only a duplication if the targets are the same. It's true of conferences too. So does the Southeastern Conference and the Florida Conference have the same mission assignment and targets? If they do, we've got duplication. If they don't, then we've got mission particularization.
Go ahead.
No, okay, so I think, and I told myself I was not going to interject myself in this thing, but I can't help it. So I would assume that if it's not target duplicate, if it's different targets, that means that the Florida Conference would have to be saying that we are not trying to reach black and brown peoples. And I have a sneaky suspicion that that's not what they're saying. They're probably saying we're trying to reach everybody. We're going to reach the Anglos and the Hispanics and the Filipinos and the rest of the Asians and the et cetera, et cetera. So in that sense, as you have described that, Doc, then I think we would probably end up having to say, yes, that is duplication, because you've got Southeastern Conference saying we are trying to reach black and brown peoples, and you've got the other conference saying, well, we are too.
So, okay. Good comeback. I don't want to dominate the discussion. Good comeback.
I was just going to say that this question has become more pertinent in the last part of the 20th century, when there was not, I would say, a competent. I'm getting in probably out of my area of specialty, but it seems to me that when there was not an emphasis and a scarcity of dollars, this question was not germane. Right. But now the melting pot is really the color of green. We need money, and we'll get it from whoever has it, and we will facilitate an adaptation to enable us to have more resources, because the competition for the dollar is now very, 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 very stiff. And I think that in some places has created, I can't speak for Southeastern or Florida because I have never worked there, never lived there, but I think that some places the scarcity of dollars has heightened that conversation that there is a duplication, when there always has been particularization of ministry focus based on the needs of humanity.
All right.
I don't know if I can comment for a moment here, but I think, and I'm so glad that we're dealing with this question right here, because I have heard this topic over and over and over for a few years now, but it has increased. The volume has increased recently, and but usually the people that I'm hearing this from is not from African Americans; it's from others. Okay, and in my perspective as a Hispanic, I am one who is willing to listen. I'm one who is willing to learn, and I am one who is willing to say, I think that the decisions about regional conference need to be made, and they need to be made by the regional conference. I don't think that those of us who have not been part of the history, who have no experience, the reasons why regional conferences needed to come into existence, we should be telling regional conferences what needs to be done. Okay, so I think that is something that needs to remain within the regional conference. However, having said that, I think that we have come to a time that even though there might be a particularization of emphasis, I think we have come to a time in which state conferences and regional conferences need to be winning and reaching the people who they can find. Okay, I don't think that we need to be exclusive at this point. I think that we need to be inclusive. There are reasons why regional conferences exist. I don't think that at this point the mission and the people that a regional conference reach need to be limited, and neither with the state. I think that we have plenty of people to be reached during this time in which we're living, and I think all conferences need to be going for the people that they can reach.
I think we also need to take one step back. I don't know if every one of our members or our viewers understand the concept of regional conference and state conferences. I think that's a sanitization of the thinking. You know, we sanitized what was happening because there are some state conferences that we consider state conferences who are regional. They take up more than one state. You know, we want to say that regional conferences are conferences that manage a number of states, but there are some white conferences, and I'm going to just be straight.
Kansas, Nebraska.
Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri,
Kentucky,
Rocky
Tennessee.
Mountain Conference.
Arkansas, Louisiana.
Yeah.
Yes, they could be regional conferences in essence, based on the
Georgia, Cumberland.
But so we need to be very clear that when we say regional conference, we're actually talking about a black conference or a conference that is led by African Americans, so that we're not hiding behind state lines. I think which makes it very nice to deal with. So here we have a situation where there are other ethnic structures within our conferences or in our territory, and they don't have a conference. And so the question starts to seep in light of COVID-19, and we're dealing with all these things financially. Should we now begin to look at consolidating our reach? Because now everybody's online. It's not like we have to go into the inner cities anymore. I could stay right here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and reach the folks in New York City. You know, it's a new game now. Should we? I think the question. I think Dr. Henry, you were leading towards this, and it was kind of dropped before about revisiting. Share with us a little bit what you were trying to say with that question as we talked about it in our pre-show.
Right. So, to revisit, to look at again what we are doing as a church. Should we look at the effectiveness of the state conference? Should some state conferences become regional conferences? I don't know. Just throw that out there. But should we look at it again? Is there a need now to look at it again, given COVID-19? We're in a pandemic. We see that companies are merging. Some businesses are closing. Should we look at it again? Or should we say, you know what? The 58 or 59 conferences that we have is fine. Keep it the same way.
Well, I think, okay, so I think, yes. So I think, of course, everything should be always open to revisiting and reexamination.
By all means.
That's a fundamental of improvement. So the answer to that question is obviously yes. But I think there's something I wanted to say that triggers this conversation. I spent a lot of years working in the area of race and class and culture. And I found that it's very difficult for us in the Seventh-day Adventist Church to have honest conversations about race and the role it plays in mission and structure and culture and all of those things. Depending upon how you approach the issue of race, it's going to influence the way you even come at this conversation of structure. If you believe that Christians ought to be, now this is ideology, Christians ought to be colorblind, right? If you believe that, then there's a way you're going to approach structure with its individuation and its nuances. As a matter of fact, you're probably going to choose a kind of utopian kumbaya theology that says, let's just all come together. Why can't we just all come together and love Jesus? If that's your belief. And so you can write a whole dissertation. I sat on a dissertation committee for a certain seminary that I won't name, but in Michigan. So the gentleman writes a dissertation, and the dissertation's title goes something like this: an analysis of segregated conferences and something. So when it's my time to question the young man, I say, okay, would you define segregation for us? I said, in your dissertation, there is no place where you define segregation. Does the Seventh-day Adventist Church actually practice segregation? In the definition of what segregation is. So the church may not be integrated in the way that he envisioned, but the church is desegregated. I can join, I keep saying Filipinos, I don't know why I keep saying it, why I'm with the Filipinos today. I can join a Filipino church. Nobody's going to say,
Filipinos are good people.
Yeah, they're going to say, because you're black. Nobody's going to say that. The church is desegregated, but the fact that people come together, in my opinion, my humble opinion, is because of affinity and the power of affinity. Don't believe that every Latino who goes to a Latino church goes there because they can't speak English. That's not true. There are other cultural elements that include the language that go beyond the language. And in Paul, my last statement, in Paul, you actually operationalize these aspects of identity. 1 Corinthians 9, to the Jew a Jew, to the Greek a Greek. You operationalize those aspects of identity in order to advance the mission the farthest and the fastest. That's the way I understand the work of a regional conference. And should other people should have whatever it takes to make the mission go the farthest and the fastest, but they have to decide that. The Hispanics have to decide whether they want a conference or not. Not me. That's not my call. That's not my call.
Dr. Pollard is never going to come on the show with me again because I'm going to pick on you for a little bit, Doc. So in that,
I don't mind. I've been through this many times. I don't mind. But my colleagues have much to say, and please, let's not take away from what they have.
Sure. In the quotation that you just made about Paul, to the Jew a Jew, and the Greek a Greek, Paul was not saying that I'm going to send a Jew to a Jew or send a Greek to a Greek. He says, I will be to a Jew, and I will be to a Greek. I will accommodate myself to those various cultures so that I can reach them.
Yes. Okay.
All things to all men.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what Paul is showing there is not ethnocentrism, but ethnic sensitivity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So in some places we get that, and in some places we don't. And if it can be operationalized individually, it could also be operationalized collectively, could it not? Could it not? Okay. So when that text in 1 Corinthians 9 is the fundamental missiological text for how you begin to operationalize ministry to different people groups. And yes, you're right. Paul said, I do that. But how many of us are Paul? We have groups of people who do that as well. What Paul understood was the role of culture and language and all these diversities in accomplishing the mission. And that's all I'm saying is that's a very difficult discussion if you believe that Christians should be colorblind, that there's no culture but the culture of Christ. We need to be Christocentric, not all of that. If you believe that, then you're going to come at this whole structural conversation really with an unstated colorblind assumption. That's all I'm saying.
And we need to quickly also say, I just saw that Candy over in our YouTube feed talked a little bit about the regional conferences being racially divided because we tend to be more we think that there are only blacks in the regional conference, but the regional conferences are just filled with multicultural groups. Blacks, there are even a few. There may not be a white church, but there are a number of white individuals who worship in a church that belongs to a regional conference. Also Korean, African. So there is a multitude of races and cultures within the regional conferences. So when we speak of the regional conferences, I think our context here is more sense to kind of look at leadership as opposed to the people or the church structures or the local structures that are within the regional conference.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay. So that then leads us to our next question. Yeah. I didn't realize how connected that was.
Hey, but Roger, before you go to the next question here, I think that we do need to revisit. Okay, I think we do need to revisit. I have a problem with people every time that they talk about revisiting. The first thing that they need to have on the list is the regional conferences. I think that we need. Okay, I have a problem with that because I have a problem with that. I think that we need to revisit the way we do church. I think we need to revisit our structure. Do we need 59 conferences? I think we need to revisit unions. Do we need all the unions? I think we need to revisit. Do we need all our schools right now that we have? Some of them with not too many students. I think that we need to revisit all of that to see how we can love, seek, and save people who are lost better. Okay, and I hope that as a church we do not wait for a great financial problem to then be forced to revisit this. I hope that we're able to revisit these issues in times in which we're still able to do it rather than as an emergency. Okay, but now let me quickly go to something that Leslie said. But I think it is important that we realize, for example, I am a Hispanic. I don't attend a Hispanic church. I go to an English church. Several reasons for that. One of the reasons is my children. My children. My wife is Australian. I'm Cuban. My kids are a mixture of that. Okay, and our culture as a family, it's a little bit different than you might have at the local. So I prefer a multicultural church right now. We have lots of second and third generations right now of Adventists in North America, immigrants who would rather worship at a church that is not the church of their parents. Okay, and there are things that we need to take into account when we talk about the importance of affinity. It is true. It is easier for us to reach people who are just like us, but at the same time, living in North America, well, we need to realize that perhaps we have a whole bunch of Poles that need to have the ability to reach not only to their own but to others as well. So while I see the need for the regional conference, and I think that the only people that need to be talking about the future of regional conference are those that live through the history, not others that ignore the history. I think that it will be okay. Not only for state conferences, but for regional conference to expand their reach and to be able to expand the target group rather than to have to be limited to we're only going to reach these people because of affinity. I think that affinity through our children and through our children's children is expanding in the times in which we live. That's my humble opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was going to say that, is there a need, as we revisit this issue, is there a need for more regional conferences within the North American division? What's your take on that? Maybe Pastor Pollard or
I'll let Dr. Graham speak because he hadn't said anything in a while.
I've been captivated by the conversation. I've been thinking about the points that my fellow panelists have made. I think that going back to what we started about reviewing, absolutely, it's always the appropriate thing to review where you are, the resources you have, the targets, how you're meeting your targets, accomplishing your goals, etc. And I believe that time and circumstances has a way of refining those. We have to be able to take our always relevant theological positioning and place it in a context that is contemporary and do what is best to fulfill that mission. So yes, it is always good to review. And it may be that we have too many of particular churches that are not accomplishing the particular goal that they were set out to do. And it may be, when I was a pastor, one of the things I did with the nominating committee, you guys who are pastoring churches, I would say that if we don't have anyone who's gifted to do that ministry should not be impaneled in the officer group of the church. Let's focus on the talents, skills, and abilities we have so that we can accomplish what God has given us the ability to accomplish. And so I think we can review, does this church, is it meeting its, is there a pro forma? What are they accomplishing? Are they meeting any mission? Do they have a mission? Do they know their mission? And are they mobilized to meet it? And under those guidelines, we can come to a question that maybe we have not enough here, too much there. Maybe we can prune the tree to get more fruit. And that's something that is a painful process, but I think it is a very mature process to be able to say that we need to close a church here so that we can give more growth there. Where is God moving? Is it moving where our churches are? Is it moving in the modalities that our churches are performing or presenting Christ? And I go back to what Jose said. We need to remember that we're not to be colonizers, creating other people who worship God in our mentality and our modality, but we need to be expanding how God can be approached because He is unlimited. And there are a few things I believe that are forbidden in trying to facilitate reaching people in languages and modalities that they understand, even though if it is not my natural modality or my experience, I need to be able to reach those people. In becoming all things to all people or becoming more things to more people, we have to realize what we have to offer, what we have to offer, where we need to increase our ability to reach, and who we need to, and we have a terrible thing in our church. I love the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but I think that it's not good that we have limited the participants in who can be authorized to reach other people, limiting who speaks to people for God.
Wow.
Powerful thing. We need to deploy more people and authorize more people and impanel more people to reach the people groups around us.
Wow.
And that means that we need to look at everybody who's like us, who's not like us, in both gender, race, ethnicity, and deploy all people to reach more groups. I may not be able to reach the Greeks, but if I know some Greeks who can accept this message, they know how to reach people better than I do. So I'm getting excited because this is good stuff.
Hey, Ricardo's getting to me right here.
I'm being stimulated by the conversation. Thank you.
All right.
Can I follow up? Can I follow up quickly with something here? Well, Ricardo, you said something that is really important, and that we have churches that are not fulfilling the mission and the reason what they are here for. And that is one of the reasons why we have made a big deal about planting new churches. Because we realize that older Adventist churches, the churches have a lifespan, just like human beings. They last for about 100 years. If they do well, if they are revitalized, they can go longer. But we realize that some of our older churches are having issues and problems reaching newer generations, Generation Z, millennials. They're having issues reaching single moms, they are one of the largest unreached groups like the church, and they're willing to be reached if they will feel that they are wanted in the church. We have an issue as a church reaching the LGBTQ plus in our church, and the question is, if we are the Church of God, shouldn't we be there to reach the people, the LGBTQ plus? Are we going to leave them to the Catholics? Are we going to leave them to the Presbyterian, or can we as the people of God reach them as well? So that is one of the reasons why we've had to create new structures, because some of our older structures are not able to reach the people. So the older structures are able to reach only the people that we have. And we already have the people that we have. So we don't need to reach the people we have. So we need to reach new people. Are you getting me? So there is definitely a need to revisit, because there are people that we're not reaching that need to be reached, and the older Adventism and older structures cannot reach it.
Okay.
We talked about revisiting the structure, and we also talked about if churches are not performing, then here's something. But how about conferences? I mean, there some conferences out there, and we're not going to name any of them, but if they're not reaching their territory, how do you address that? How do you deal with that?
I leave that to the administrators in the room.
Yeah,
hey, look.
Conference presidents.
If I could throw this out in there as well. Well, go ahead and answer that, because I have a follow-up to what we were just talking about. So go ahead, and anybody wants to field that one.
Well, yes, I did, but I really want to throw a monkey wrench into this conversation.
My Lord,
I really do.
You've been doing that since we started.
I do, because
that's all you've done.
We all believe in Ellen G. White, right? We all believe in Ellen G. White. Okay, so yeah, okay, you remember her? Ellen G. White. Now,
didn't I take a class from you, Doc?
It was the youth of the Atlantic Union.
I know you all believe in Ellen G. White. Okay, so. There are two narratives about race in America, and they're connected to this conversation that we're having. The liberal narrative is that America is getting better and better and better about race. Now, in 2008, that was at a fever pitch when Obama was elected. Okay? Then there's another narrative. This is the Fox News narrative. Well, America has gotten better and better, so what are you all complaining about? Well, there's no such thing as white supremacy and et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now, enter Ellen G. White. This is what she said, Volume 9, page 207. The colored ministers should make every effort to help their own people understand the truth for this time. This is Volume 9, guys, the infamous Volume 9. But this is the statement I want you to focus on. As time advances and race prejudices increase, hello?
Yeah.
She says it will become almost impossible in many places for white workers to labor for colored people.
Give us a time frame for that. Do you have it?
Yeah. Okay. Now you want to do exegesis, right? Okay.
No, but there's a point to that, because
we need to do exegesis. So this is Volume 9. This is at the turn of the century. This is right during the time of the lynchings. This is Volume 9. This is all in that era.
But right? I just wanted you to make the point for everybody that it was after the Civil War was done.
It was after the Civil War.
Right.
Now, Ellen White sees race prejudice not dissipating, but increasing. And so part of the liberal head bang, you see it on CNN, is the George Floyd incident. How can this be happening? And these horrible people, Okay. And then, of course, at Fox, there's one bad apple on the police force, but that's not everybody. So everybody's trying to say it's getting better around race. Ellen White says it's not going to get better. It's going to increase. And why wouldn't it? With the Holy Spirit being withdrawn, with the worst of people's passions being expressed, all of our eschatology supports that. Is this the time that you dismantle the structures designed to reach this people group? Is this the time that you do that?
Wow. We've got a couple of people who are asking for the reference to the quote again. I see a couple of questions asking.
Volume 9, very good. Volume 9, pages 207 and 208.
Good. Volume 9, 207, 208. Somebody can type that in that chat so those can find it later. Appreciate that.
And of the testimonies to the church.
And she says, as it increases, it will almost become impossible. So Ellen White's missiology, colleagues, both Jose and Rick know this, is driven by two things. Number one, the time is short. The time is short. And number two, we need to try to reach as many people as we possibly can. Now, what structures help us do that?
Yes.
That's the way Ellen White thinks about it. Time is short, and we've got to get the message out as quickly as we can. Now, what structures will help us do that? Maybe some of the things Jose is talking about, how you plant churches for secular-minded people, etc. But that's the way we have to think about structure in the context of accomplishing the mission. It seems to me, everybody.
But Dr. Pollard, what you just shared tells me that we need to change our focus from looking at conference and unions to that local structure, which is the church, because that is where the rubber meets the road. Because if we look at it from a conference perspective, then that means we'll have not just 58 conferences, we will have 120 conferences because everybody wants to have their group. And we kind of see that because there are all these caucuses and forums that are forming nationally, not just in regions, but nationally, that is moving the agenda for ethnic structures for that people group. So I'm excited about this concept of looking at it from a church perspective.
Pastor, this is my last comment because I see Rick's hand. I did a study.
Don't lie. You know you're going to go at it again.
I did a study on North America on this thing. I did a study in North America. To make your point, I counted at the time, so this was 2015, I counted 33 organized collective ethnic structures in North America. From the Korean Council to the I counted 33. When you add them all up, everybody is working in that way. Now, some people may say we shouldn't, but there we are. But this is what people are doing today. 33 is what I counted.
Dr. Pollard, I want to challenge you to write your next book on that topic, because that information has not been disseminated. You know, you may have studied it. It may be there to be found, but it has not been disseminated. And the reason that's important is because the structure must be flexible enough and adaptive enough that maybe we don't create new conferences, but we have a vehicle that enables the particularization and the specialization of ministry to meet those groups. We may not need more conferences, but we need a methodology and a synchronization of talents and services to use the resources to the best ability that we have. So that in a conference, you can have a director of a particular ministry to a particular group. This person can be an officer. Now, I don't want to talk about getting rid of any conferences in the North American division, particularly because I have 7 conferences in my.
7 conferences and 1 union.
I want to stay in good stead with all those 7 conferences and their presidents, et cetera, et cetera. However, I believe that there's no limit to what we can vision and what we can create under God. While the Spirit of God is being removed, being rejected, being repelled, and people are closing their hearts, there are a class of people who are open to the free movement of the Holy Spirit. There are people crying out to God. You know, I have some stories I can tell you that I won't, but there are people who are today looking for what the Seventh-day Adventist Church has. We need to find ways to meet them and present in the best manner possible what this church really believes, what we hold dear, and particularly the special truths that we have been given. I stand convicted that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been given some truths that God never gave to any other denomination, and He's counting on us. The Godhead is counting on us to share that truth. You know, God didn't just want Adventists to be vegetarians. Someone said to me that the world has our vegetarianism. Well, God gave it to us, the concept of healthy living, so that we could give it away, give it to other people. God wants everybody to be healthy. And I'm sorry, I'm getting excited again. I'm just that type. So
preach, Doc. Preach.
Sound like you might be preaching in South Florida next week.
So listen. Here's another question. Just before we move on, I know our time is getting out of hand here. There's a whole lot of people. Oh, and we lost Dr. Henry. I guess he'll be back. But there are a lot of people who are listening who hear us talking about revisiting the structure. And they might be wondering how does that happen? What does that look like? Who's involved in that? And I think how can they be a part of that? Because a lot of people have their ideas. You know, if there is ever at any point a restructuring, who does that? What does that look like? And how can the people in the pews? How can the people there? How can they participate in that conversation of restructuring? How does that happen?
I yield to my superiors, Dr. Graham and Pastor Cortez. I yield to them.
Well, the conversation
Ricardo.
really should start at local conferences, because that's where the rubber hits the road. The combination, the churches that are there really are where the rubber hits the road, the pastors. And remember that the conference committees are majority populated by lay people. And so those people, if the burden is there, they need to tickle the consciences of the president, the executive secretaries, whoever. The conference committee needs to say, we think it's time to reevaluate the structure. And I point back to, I think it was Elder Cortez Jr. who said about the meeting in Dulles. There was a commission. Pastors and lay people gathered together, the first time North American Division has had that type of a meeting, asking, what do we do to make our work more effective in spreading this particular message about Jesus Christ throughout this division? And one was that we came up with study commissions that studied areas, and one was about the structure. Now, it came away with some points to be emphasized, and I'm not sure that information has been communicated to the grass levels. But part of that was to look at places of duplication. And I think that the duplication of services, the duplication of ministries really needs to be restudied, because you don't have a duplication if you have different people groups you're working at. And I think that's significant to a discussion about that. But to get that started, I think the lay people need to talk along with the pastors. And when the voices are large enough, the people who help make the decisions will have to listen. And I'm not talking about a revolution, even though it may be a revolutionary idea to change what's been in place for these many years in the North American Division.
I think that when we talk about restructuring, we must be careful not to assume right away that when we talk about a restructure, we need to start dismantling organizations that serve as safety nets for the advancement of the mission in minority groups.
Amen.
Okay, I think because usually at times those are the first ones to go. And, the reason why these regional conferences and other ethnic or racial organizations have been created in North America has been pretty much to create a safety net for the advancement of mission of that group. And when the people that you're trying to reach, all of a sudden they are not represented around the table, the needs of those people, they tend to be ignored. And oftentimes those groups, they go unreached. So I think that as we look at this, at restructures, we should not make the assumption that the first things that we need to do is looking at how to dismantle organizations that serve the needs, the missional needs of groups that are minority within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Even though at the time in which we live, I don't think that we have a great majority in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America. I don't think that we have a large majority at this point anymore, but I think that we need to be careful that we look into minority groups to dismantle their organizations as soon as we start talking about restructuring. We should not do that.
I actually believe that our minority structures, such as regional conferences, are a good place to help other ethnic groups to get a foot in. I applaud Oakwood University for when I went to Oakwood University, there were very few Hispanics who were students there. They may have been, at that time when I went, they were mavericks. There were one or two. But to see that Oakwood now is considered
amazing
in the Hispanic mindset, that this is an option for our students to go to, says a lot right there. They have now more than just Southern or Andrews or the other schools to go to. That says a lot, especially from a regional perspective. And even in our conferences, when we have those other ethnic groups have a foothold and be able to worship and be a part. When we have camp meetings, you have a Hispanic camp meeting, and you have a Franco-Haitian camp meeting, and you have a Korean group coming together in camp meeting. So there are places where this happens, and it does happen in the state conference too. Don't get me wrong, but I just believe someone shared in our chat that if we would get away from looking at it from a business. Well, I shouldn't say business, but we need to begin to have the same conversation as we are trying to move the mission forward and not just trying to position ourselves to hold on to something we have. If we can move the mission forward, then collaboration becomes easier, because I am not just trying to keep my job, I'm moving the mission of Christ forward in our dealing. So yes, a lot of we're talking about revisiting, but the revisiting has to be involving with the looking at it from the mission perspective, and not just from a structural business efficiency. We have to keep the mission moving and be able to accomplish the mission.
Roger, may I add something quickly here? Because the point that you just mentioned about Oakwood bringing in Hispanic students, I think that's great job done by Leslie and your assistant to the president right there, Isaac Ibarra. That's a great work, and I think that this is something that I don't know if we talk about enough as minorities, African American, Hispanic. There are times when you go from being a minority without a voice or a minority without authority, and all of a sudden you acquire a voice, you acquire authority. I think it is at times like that when we ought to remember what it used to be like, that we do not repeat with the next minority, because there are going to be others. There are going to be others that are coming behind us that do not have a voice yet, that do not have authority yet. We are not to repeat what was done to us, does not need to be repeated to others. Okay, the cycle needs to stop at some point. So I think that is very important. That is very important that as different groups in the church acquire a voice and acquire authority, that we do not repeat what was done to us, and the reason why we had to create the organizations that we created.
Right, and I was going to say this too, and I don't know, I'm sorry, my connection got cut off, so I had to get back on. But, the revisiting question could mean, after looking at the data, it could mean an expansion of the regional conference. It could mean a merging of state conferences, okay? And it could, because the way we are in this country, like some people say, do we still need HBCU schools? Of course we do. We need that. Some people say, well, we already had a black president there, so we already arrived. Well, that's not so. We know that this country is still divided. We do not have the racial parity. We don't have the power that I think that we need to be represented or to sit around the table. So just like we need HBCU schools, I think there is a need for regional conferences as well. But should we expand it? There are other ethnic groups that are not, that do not have the same voice as they need to have and deserve to have at the table. What can we do to allow the other ethnic groups to have a significant voice around the table? And as we talk about the restructuring of, and I know we're going a little off here, but just the system of the church, and you mentioned the committee. I mean, the union, are the unions fulfilling the intention that they had when they first came up with the union? Or does the General Conference have a foothold in the unions so that the unions will not fulfill their original intentions? So these things, I think, need to be revisited. But even after they're revisited, and I think here's a fundamental challenge. We are a constituent-based church. So when you are a constituent-based church and you're not going to, vote, is very rare, and there may be a case where a conference voted to merge or so forth. I don't know if there's a case like that in our denomination. But when you're a constituent-based church, it's going to be hard for you to vote yourself out or to say, I don't need this, So I think that's a fundamental challenge within our denomination as we talk about restructuring and maybe even expanding some of the regional conference territories.
When you have people who have the ability under God to affect their own destiny, it's very difficult for them to arrive at a conclusion to remove that opportunity. And I don't think it's even in line with God. I believe that God wants people to connect with him and to use the talents they give them in the particularization of the place where they live to live out as a witness for him. The fact of the matter, you mentioned the unions, are they meeting their responsibility? In 1901 or 1902, when we had the reorganization of the church, powers and authorities were divided. Powers were taken from the General Conference. And one particular statement that I remember reading is that so the General Conference would not dictate to the conferences, the unions were given certain authorities. The union, for example, I hate to open this door, but the union is the only place authorized to ordain pastors to the gospel ministry in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I'll stop right there.
Doors open. Doors open. It's open.
I feel the breeze. I feel the breeze. I feel the breeze.
I feel a draft.
Shots have been fired.
May I respond to an observation too? And I certainly I validate what Rick has said. The role of the unions was to abrogate kingly power. The unions came about just around the time Ellen White was making all those statements around the turn of the century about kingly power.
That's right.
And she broke that up. She made sure that was broken up. But I wanted to respond to something that Jose said just a moment ago about not repeating the mistakes that were repeated with us. One of the things that we're attempting to do, and we may not be doing it perfectly at Oakwood, but as I sat down with Isaac Ibarra, my special assistant for diversity and inclusion, I said, now I want to grow Oakwood in serving all of the varied constituencies, particularly the Latino constituency, starting with the regional conferences. We've got regional conferences that have 40 and 50 churches, Latino churches, et cetera, et cetera. So I said to him, but Isaac, from my learning at Loma Linda, Rick, this is what I don't want to do. I don't want to just go after students, and the students get on campus and they look around and they don't see anybody who looks like them in any positions of authority. They don't see anybody in religion. They don't see anybody in administration. They don't see any department chairs, because the young people need to see this could be me. This could be me, right? Amen. And so one of the things we've been able to do is to attract high-profile pastors and leaders from the Latino community to serve, and then to be in positions where the young people get to see role models. Because you know what happened with us. They let us in, but that was about the end of it. You looked around, you didn't see anybody that looked like any of us at some of these schools. And some of the Adventist schools are still like that. But again, we don't want to just do numbers among this community, is what I said to Isaac. We want to do transformation. That's what we want to do. So beyond numbers, we want to do transformation. And Isaac has been wonderful in helping the institution navigate across cultures in order to make and my good intentions notwithstanding, I'm still not grounded in the community of Latino brothers and sisters. He is, so he can help in that way and translate for us, right? So,
Leslie, I believe that what you're saying is that we want platforms that look like our congregations.
Amen.
And we want boards that look like our congregation, not just platforms, but boards that look like our congregations. And I think that that's definitely something that our church can aspire to improve, not for the sake of representation, but for the sake of facilitating the mission better. I think that's something that our church can improve at this point.
And I would say, as we do this conversation, I would say the facilitation of the mission, and I would even say on the Act 6 principle, the representation. When we brought on Pastor Sergio Romero to our board, he's the first Latino who's ever been a member of the Oakwood board. Rick, you remember? But his insights about how to reach the community, how to you can't pay for the things that he shares. You just can't pay for them. So when we do it that way, the mission goes farther and it goes faster. It does.
All right, we've got to move to the next question here. We've got two more, actually about four more altogether, but I want to get this one real quick. So if we can do this one, there are some people in our community who still are asking the question, why do we have separate conferences to begin with? 30 seconds. Who wants to take a shot at that? Because we've been over this and over this and over this, but just for some context, anybody, 30 seconds.
Here's a 30-second answer. I'll try a 30-second answer. 30 time me. Here we go. 2 reasons. Number one, there was the triggering history, and that culminated in 1944 with the lady being left out in the hall and dying. But people just stopped there, right? Miss Lucy Bayard, she died at Washington Sand, wouldn't treat her, found out she was a colored people, just, that. So that's 15 seconds on that. The other 15 seconds on why we have regional conferences had to do with the missiology. In 1944, Pastor McElhaney, tell me I got 5 seconds, he said, GC president, he said, it looks like when the church is guided by the colored people, it grows faster and the work moves with more efficiency. And so in 44, there were 17,000 members, 233 churches. Now, 50 years later, 60 years later, whatever we are at now, 60 years later, 350,000 members and $200+ million worth of tithe or whatever. Let me say this. If race wasn't such a difficult thing to talk about, we would say that the creation of regional conferences is the single most effective missional innovation that has ever been experienced in the North American division.
Wow. One more time. Say it again.
If race wasn't so difficult to talk about, because you look at the starting point, you look at where we are, and now it doesn't mean we can't revisit it and come back and say how to do it better. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying because race is involved with it, we can't even declare that this is the greatest missional innovation in the North American division. We can't even say that because we're so sensitive about the racial ramifications of it. But it is. The numbers say that, financial and growth. Okay. There's never been, show me one other, I say to my friends when we're discussing this, y'all say arguing, I say discussing. When we're discussing this.
I'm with you on discussing. I'm with you. I'm right there with you.
Innovation. Show me another missional innovation in North America that's been as wildly successful as this. Show me one.
So,
and they can.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Who was? I heard somebody.
That's short answer. History and missiology. That's why we have the conference structures that we have right now.
Okay. So that brings us the segue to the next question. So that's the history of it. The next part of it is which people often challenge, is that's what happened when we created them. Is that still the current reality in 2020? That becomes the follow-up question or the natural question that follows behind. Sure, when we created regional conferences in 1940, there was an explosion in evangelism, particularly among the black people. Church grew, money grew, all of those things. But now in 2019, there was a question in the chat from YouTube, from W.W. Niles. It said something about in Florida and in New York, where you've got these two conferences. You can't find any white churches in some of those areas, or it's hard to find Anglo churches in some areas in those regions. How do you explain the differences of having the two different conferences there? And I can speak to, I'm in South Florida. I'm in Fort Lauderdale. In Fort Lauderdale, it's hard to find a single, anywhere from Tampa down, from Central Florida down, it's hard to find white churches in this area. But there are a lot of churches between the two conferences, which means that the Florida conference, typically the white conference or the state conference, they are doing mission. They are reaching black people in black communities, growing the church. They're not dormant. They are growing. They're growing almost they are growing. They're not stagnant. So how would you address the current reality if before state conferences were not reaching black people, but in 2020 we do have areas where it seems like that is happening, probably areas that it seems like it's not happening? How would we address those concerns? I knew Dr. Pollard was going to wait on that one. He's got stuff to say. He's just going to wait.
One reality is that, as Dr. Pollard so eloquently said earlier, it's very difficult for we Seventh-day Adventists to have an open, honest conversation about race and racism and the implications thereof. There is something about us that has disallowed us to do what the mainline churches did in the 70s, and that is to admit that they contributed to racism in the society. Number two, the United States, instead of the North American division, and this is a critique of myself also, instead of, it appears to me, I could be wrong and I could be corrected, but it appears to me in so many ways that the church mirrors society rather than truly being light and salt to the society. Wow. So that which exists in the society has seeped in or permeated into Adventism, Christianity as a whole. The third thing I would say is that I think I agree with the books by Cornell West in Race Matters and Andrew Hacker in the book Two Nations. They talk about the phenomenon of white flight. And it's a done deal when you reach a certain percentage that most of my Anglo people will move away from blacks at a certain figure. Cornell said when it becomes 25% minority, Andrew Hacker said 15%. In fact, Andrew Hacker did a study. He taught at Cornell and City College of New York. And in one chapter, I remember he talks about that he tells his white students that they actually put a value on their whiteness. And they protest, and he says, okay, play along with me. I represent a company that assigns identity and ethnicity and culture at birth. In your instance, a mistake was made. At the stroke of midnight, you will become black, and you will remain black for the rest of your life. But we will compensate you for the inconvenience of being black. How much would that cost you? And he says, usually his students say $1 million a year for every year that I have to live as a black person. Wow. And Dr. Hacker said that indicates that white people put a value on whiteness. Wow. That black people don't have the opportunity to do. Now, since what is true in the larger society seeps into the church, and since the Seventh-day Adventist Church in North America only has had one conversation about race and racism in an open manner in 1999 and has not revisited that, it is very possible that what's true in the current society, in our current government, is reflected in our church. And until we deal with that, we have issues. And the Spirit of God gives the opportunity for people to see everyone as equals. If that Spirit of God is being resisted, that's one of the benefits. If that Spirit of God is being resisted, my wife is telling me I'm speaking too loud. If that
you're doing a great job.
Praise God. Thank God for wives. If that reality is true, and there's going to be more and more resistance on both sides of people accepting the message from people who don't look like them. The last thing I want to say, and it's bad for a preacher to say the last thing, but the last thing I want to say at this point is we talk about...
You're in safe company, Doc. You're in safe company.
Leslie has said that like 5 times already.
It's like close.
Roger mentioned people being reached through the internet. And that is true. However, we do have a digital divide, and the people who are disaffected are usually the ones at the bottom of the totem pole or the economic ladder, which happen to be black and brown people. So we even in the city where I live, the city has given away computers to kids, just to find that most of them in this district don't have access to the internet at home, and so they cannot be involved in the online education, the virtual education. So we have, only God is going to be able to complete the work that he wants done. Anyway.
Yeah, I want to point out Prince Mallory, who is one of our viewers, and he made a comment about the fact that when we talk about white flight, there is also black flight.
Yes.
Where blacks begin to believe that if I can move from this particular situation, I will do better. And I have to be honest with you, that happened to me. I lived in Brooklyn, New York, on 95th Street between Church and Linden. I'm gonna share where I grew up, East Flatbush. And when we had the opportunity, my mom and I had the opportunity to move out of Brooklyn. We moved to Queens. We felt we arrived. We got to Queens, and then there are some that I know that would move even further out to the island, Long Island, right, Jose? They'll move out to the island, and they would have arrived, and they just commute into the churches. So there is still a sense of, we blame white flight, but there is a sense of black flight that happens in our churches that changes the community and maybe even changes the way we meet people, or at least meet needs in those communities. Had we stayed, we might have been able to make an impact.
But Roger, on that point, you earlier it was mentioned that in Florida it was mentioned, but there are plenty of white people in Florida. What happened to the white Adventists? The black Adventists are not going to flee from all of the black Adventists, but where are the white people? We're not reaching white people for several reasons in our North American division. We're not really reaching the homegrown black people in numbers that we used to. Most of our churches, God bless the Caribbeans, and for people from the islands, God bless them that we've been able to reach them, and they've come into our churches. But there's something about our ideology or our practice that we need. Yep. This is part of the review. Who are we reaching? Who are we not reaching? What do we need to do better, differently, more effectively to reach the groups that we haven't been reaching or have lost a touch with a group that we used to reach? In the Pacific Union, the fastest growing groups are the Hispanic groups. There is still a evangelistic thrust that is not repeated or reflected in the other groups that are in the Pacific Union. Praise God for people who are winning anybody to Christ. Thank you.
I think that we need to address the one of the reasons for perhaps whites not for our church not being right now a church that is reaching white people. As I go across North America and I always make a point to look at non-denominational churches in different cities and suburbs all across North America. And I have visited at times to see what is it that they're doing, because perhaps we can learn from others.
Yes.
And I know that I know that right now, after I said that, I know that a whole lot of people are going to come at me real hard. But listen, we got the Sabbath from someone who was not an Adventist.
Well,
okay, Ellen G. White was not an Adventist to start with. I mean, that's where we got our pioneer from the church. Okay, so we got a lot of the things at the beginning. Everything that we got as Adventists, we got it from non-Adventists. So at times it is okay to look at others and what they're doing. And I see some of the churches across North America, and I'm referring mostly to non-denominational churches, filled with it's not only white, it's multicultural, but a lot of white people going to the churches. So perhaps we need to look at some of the things that some of those churches are doing in reaching white Americans and perhaps Canadian Americans. Canadians. If we look at Canada, I'm sorry, because the North American division is not just the United States. Yes. How can we reach North Americans? Something else that I would like to say: we're having a hard time now reaching second and third generation Latinos, and we're having a hard time reaching African Americans as well. So, as a church, I think that we need to go beyond our traditions, beyond the things that we have always done before, beyond the type of music that we have always used, beyond the type of dress that we encourage in some of our churches. I'm not talking about the message. I'm talking about the approach, because perhaps in our approach, we may be turning off some people who have moved on from some of our approaches that we have used in the past, and they may not be the approaches that reach to them at this point. I don't know. That's just taking a shot at that point. When it comes to white flight, my question is, if people are flying, where are they flying to? Okay, because and that is sad. It's sad because at times you see people who left this place, but you don't see them anywhere else. And my fear is that they are not just flying. My fear is that we're losing white Adventists from Adventism altogether. Okay, that they're not going anywhere.
Wow.
Perhaps they're just watching us on TV and they're watching Hope Channel. They're doing something that, but that's a fear that I have. And as a church, we must be able to sacrifice some of our traditions to be able to win some people. Okay, if my hymn book is not making it for them, I'd rather have them than my hymn book. Okay, but let's see how we can. And I know some people are going to say some things about that as well. Okay, but the only reason that we exist as a church is for people. Amen. If our traditions are more important than our people, then our church has ceased to be relevant.
Wow, powerful.
Wow. You say amen.
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 You guys are just leaving me alone here.
I think you're right. I think you're right, Jose. We need to re-examine, and we need to be very, very. It's a very mature thing to say this is where I'm failing, and I need to do something different. We have to get out of denial and see what's real, and then structure ourselves to deal with the new realities. The new realities is what we're offering is not attracting people, and we need to find another way of offering it to reach the people. And they decline the invitation, that's one thing, but we have not been even able to reach them, in my opinion, in a successful, effective way. So I think across the board,
so here
effectiveness is low. Jose, our accession rate here in North America. We're given a great pass by Barna and those guys because Adventism is still the fastest growing Christian group in denomination in the United States, but our numbers are very small when we compare to the world Adventist Church.
About 2%. We're growing about 2%.
So I would be curious then. I would be curious, and I'll propose one. I would be curious that we on this panel, at least Rick and Jose and I, have something we can influence. So I would say when we talk about some of the traditions we need to sacrifice. So since we're talking to pastors now. So one is the whole pastoral change process. So in an African-American community, Los Angeles, Miami, and sections, Liberty City, etc. Okay. When we are rotating pastors every 3, 4, 5 years, 5, 6 years. But the Baptist pastor who has been fighting for economic justice, for job empowerment, for empowerment zones in the city where his church that's his parish. And we've had, in the 30 years he's been the pastor there, we've had 10 pastors. The community cannot take us seriously.
It's like taking the father away from a family and bringing a new father every 3 or 4 years. Total dysfunctional family.
That's a tradition that we need to examine in light of the new reality. I'm in a city now. When I left in 97, Pastor Julius Scruggs was the pastor of First Missionary Baptist. I come back 20 years later as president of the university. He's still the pastor. He just retired now of First Missionary Baptist. Some of you know him, Jose. Some of the guys know him because they come here for evangelism council. Okay. Yeah. That man is a force in the city. They take his phone calls. Politicians want to talk to him. And he's a very focused Christian pastor type. So when we talk about traditions, I'd be curious as to what are some of the other. That's one I think needs to really be revisited. When we get a pastor in a city that we want to transform and take for the Adventist mission and message, they can't be flying in there in 3 years and 4 years and get out and think that that's going to impact that city. It's not. All that's going to do is let them run 3 or 4 evangelistic meetings, baptize some people, and then move on to the next place.
That's it.
If that's our motto, then that's going to tell you why we're going to struggle reaching the 2nd and 3rd and 4th generation. When you're competing with a man who baptized my mother, who raised my children, who buried my nephew, who
my Lord,
married all the kids, dedicated the next kids.
He is a member of their family. He is a member of their. You're muted, Rick. He is a member of their family. That's a tradition that needs to change.
So in light of that, Dr. Pollard, what else you think needs to be changed? Because you talked about a very touchy subject there, because I have left congregations and I mean tears. Your young people are still connected to me because of the years that the few years that I stayed with them, we made them a priority. What else would you say would you say that needs to be changed in this conversation that would help the ethnic structures exist? I guess that's the question.
I think the liturgical culture has to change. The liturgical culture. When we've got churches that are still saying you only sing in our church from the hymnal. Well, okay, if somebody want to just sing all them 19th century songs, go ahead and do that. But to make that some kind of requirement, go ahead and do that. But if that's what you want to do personally, go ahead and do that. But to require that and then to elevate that to the level of a GYC premise.
No,
he didn't.
It's retrogressive. No, first of all, watch me. Not only is it retrogressive, it's not necessary.
Yeah.
God stopped speaking to songwriters in the 20th century?
The Holy Spirit did not die.
The Holy Spirit died in the 20th century. He doesn't inspire a Steve Green or he doesn't talk to these people, Wintley Phipps. God doesn't speak to those songwriters too. It's not necessary. Again, Jesus said, "You worship me in vain," elevating these traditions because that's what you're doing. These are This has nothing to do with the gospel, and it has nothing to do with effectiveness.
Awesome. Roger, you know something else that could change, perhaps.
Share with us, Doctor.
If in your church, when you show up for Sabbath school at 10 o'clock, no one is there. Perhaps it's not that people are cold spiritually. Perhaps it's that people worked all week and they need a little break on Sabbath morning to rest, like the commandment says to rest. Why couldn't you make it a little bit later so you give people a little time to sleep, a little time to rest, and then they can come and worship with all their energies, rather than waking them up really early on the only day that they get to rest. That's another thing that perhaps could change. Another thing, most people don't own a suit and a tie. Why does it have to be a code? And in some of our churches, if you don't wear a suit and a tie, you're not holy enough.
I wish you would leave my friend Dr. Henry alone. Stop messing with him like that, man. He's sitting right in front of you.
Well, Dr. Henry and you told us to come informal, and you came with a nice, jacket and a little flower at the top. I don't know what's wrong with you guys.
We're pastors. We're on a whole nother level.
All right, but these are things that perhaps a lot of North Americans, and I want to say North Americans, including Americans and Canadians, are not used to. The suit and tie on the weekend, the having to get up early. Perhaps, church a little bit later, relax a little bit when it comes to dressing, make sure people can come in comfortable. Those things will help. Do not talk about vegetarianism as a doctrine, but talk about it as something that benefits your life. It's not something for salvation. It's something that benefits your life, that you can live longer. Okay, so those are some of the things. And one thing, I'm tired of people saying that we as a church, that we do not do well because our doctrine and our message is unpopular.
Wow.
Listen up quickly. Jesus, every time that Jesus showed up anywhere, he had a crowd.
Mercy.
So if we say that we're the followers of Jesus, and if we say that we're the hands and the feet and the heart and the eyes of Jesus, but when we show up, we don't have a crowd, perhaps we need to learn as a church a lot more from Jesus. Because anytime Jesus were anywhere, there was a crowd. Okay? So if we are Jesus to our cities and to our communities, there needs to be a crowd outside of our churches waiting for us to open.
Or to crucify us. Amen, my Lord.
On the idea of having alternate times for service, when I was a conference president, a pastor came to me and said he wanted to try something totally different. And he wanted to have his service on Friday nights. Friday night is the Sabbath, after sunset.
Jewish.
His rationale was that you're not going to get people who go to bars and clubs on Friday night to come to church on Saturday morning.
Wow.
But if you could get them to go different destinations on Friday night, then you can introduce them to our teaching. And so he started a church that met primarily on Friday night. And then they begin to segue. And I, as a conference president, I was in full support of that attempt to reach a group of people that we normally would not meet. People who had a yearning for something, they didn't know what it was. They were trying to get it fulfilled on Friday nights at clubs. He opened his church on Friday nights, and it began to grow. And these were people who were not, many of our plants are filled with people who transfer from one church or one conference. These were people who were fresh, new converts to Christianity and Adventism. So we need to do different things, and you have named a list of them, Les and Jose, that I think that should be taken seriously.
Is there another one?
May I say one other thing? I wanted to respond to, and I'm with Rick. I endorse what he said, and I thought about the comment I heard when I was in England from some of the white English pastors. They said, "Pastor, the Englishman's church is the pub. Wow. We've got to go get them."
Yeah.
But people have taboos about seeing us going to the pub and all that, but that's where they get community. The Englishman's church is the pub. Okay. So speaking of England, the phenomenon in England, of course, many of us are very much familiar with it, but for some of our listeners who may not be, is that the growth of English churches, the churches in England, has been driven largely by the Caribbean and Indian immigrants into England. Mm-hmm. And so the white British, who are still the majority in the country, are not represented substantially in the churches. And one of the challenges that the brothers and sisters in England have, and they're trying multiple things, and we need to keep praying for them, is how do you intentionally try to reach white people? Okay, so starting with where people are and recognizing white flight, right? And Rick mentioned that too, 15% in one writer, up to 25%. Then that discomfort settles in. I heard Dr. Pat Vincent, who you've had on your show a few times, and Pat's kind of radical and edgy. And Pat said to a group of Westerners in Florida, I heard him with my own ears say to them, Anselm, he said, "You all need to stop going to the white churches.
Because you're killing them.
Because you're killing them." He said you need to stop. He said you need to stop because you're killing them.
White work.
Your need for brotherhood and unity is killing these churches. We need to leave those churches and try to figure out how to get them to grow. Because guess what? The snowbird Jewish community that lands down in Florida is not going to come to a church where the majority of the people are West Indian. They're not.
That's just a fact.
You can try to make them something that they're not. You can try to require them to be something that they aren't. But that's the reality. And if I read Paul, incarnation says you start where they are. Eventually they'll protest that and be able to worship with all people group. Yeah, eventually. But I'm telling you guys, look at the data. That's not where most people are today. Mm-hmm. Even when we say that our young people are different and different and different until they get out of college. Look at the data. Look at the data. They go right back to their dominant social networks because that's where their success lies.
Now, if I may just ride on that, Les, I think one of the benefits of the regional conference structure and the state conference structure, that it creates places where people can be free to be themselves without judgmentalness of others, because there's a disconnect culturally or ethnically. If I go to the church and I hear a pastor hit a note that resonates in my soul, and I say amen, and I'm loud, I can be turned off by people looking at me as why I'm out of place. So I can go to a place where my amens and hallelujahs are accepted, and I'm not looked at as a pariah. I'm not out of place. And so the regional structure has, in the past, provided relief from the other for both blacks and whites in the main street of the market. So that is something we'll have to rescue. And I hadn't heard that Pat. I've met Pat Vincent, I know him very well, but that's a bold statement for him to make.
He said it right here, right here. It's archived.
We have to face reality. What is the truth? Ellen White said it's going to be more and more difficult as time goes on. Les pointed out earlier, she said the Holy Spirit would be withdrawn. People are closing their hearts to God. At the same time, I watch some TV shows, and it's just, I'm amazed at how these churches on television can have just humongous crowds of white people. Why can't we get some of them? What do we need to do to get them in the Adventist church? So,
amen.
You got to keep in mind that you open the door to that whenever you hear a black, a racist Adventist story. Almost every story has one of these. I showed up at a white church and they pointed me to the black church down the street. If we're going to take this avenue, then they did the right thing. They sent us to the place where we were comfortable in. If that was their motivation. Now, some of them probably were just straight out racist, but you have to. You're like, wait a minute, hold up.
Provocateur. No. I think the difference here is the issue of intentionality.
Right. Yes. Sure. Yes.
Again, it requires a conversation about race. I'm in Alabama. Once you get outside of Huntsville, which is an anomaly, those of you who've been in Huntsville is an anomaly in the state of Alabama. I go 20 minutes outside of here. I don't want to be there after sundown in some of these towns, right? It's an anomaly. You can go out there and try to plant a multiracial church, but that's not where the people are.
Right.
We can't require people to be mature in Christ when we're meeting them where they are. Yeah. So I think the difference, Anselm, in these cases is that we're talking about an intentionality with a design for growth, not somebody who in a colonizing way says to me, well, you would be more comfortable down at the church down the street. How do you know that? I might be here because I'm more comfortable here, right? But again, it requires us to be able to discuss the role that race plays in executing mission. It's real. Gender, race, all of these things actually play a role today in how you deliver mission to publics.
We should stop ignoring that. It's like we all have noses, but we ignore them. They're there. They serve a purpose. Yeah. And you need to take care of your olfactory organ so that you can have life. So we need to acknowledge the stuff that's shining around us that we try to ignore. There's no use acting like America, the North American division, is a country or a continent free of racial disparities, free of racism, even being colorblind. We need to realize where we are. There are racists among us. Some of them need to be reached. They cannot be reached by the people that they currently disparage and refuse to accept as equals. They can be reached best by their own. And we need to acknowledge that. This is the world. This is not heaven yet.
That's right.
In heaven, everybody be welcome. On earth, that's not the case.
Well, listen, Listen, we man, I don't know about you, but I have been enjoying the conversation. I remember being at the General Conference, and I remember the comments you made, Pastor Graham, when you stood up and spoke towards the issue. Oh man, I was just amazed, that you were able to put that to the table. And Dr. Pollard, you're my teacher, Pastor Cortez. I mean, we went to school together, so it's just a blessing. And as we end this program today, we went a little bit over time, but I think that our viewers can get a sense that we are in a country that we still have a need for regional presence. I think we get that. as viewers, and I think the conversation will continue.
No, we don't all get that. Don't do that. We don't all get that. Stop it. Some of us, a lot of us get that, but we don't all get that. You haven't been reading the chat. Read the chat. You'll see we don't all get that.
Just regional or black conferences. I think we have a country where, or even a division where all ethnic groups have an opportunity to worship together, and I think our division has done very well in getting that fire going, where our Native Americans, even our Native Americans, have a role in perpetrating the gospel, even on the reservation or wherever they live. And so I'm excited to be a part of the North American division. I don't know about any other division, but the North American division has given me a new outlook in understanding how I could reach other people, even my people.
And how all the ethnic groups can have a say-so at the table. Yeah. And I think that might be another conversation. How can they have a say-so
two of them anyway.
Yeah.
I think that's what Jose is saying, is that they're not at the table yet.
Well, we're glad he's at our table today.
Yes.
Right.
It's good to be at the table.
All right. Well, again, next week, what do we have going on next week, gentlemen?
Man,
something is happening next week. Talk to us.
I don't know. I think normally, and let's tell our audience this. Normally, as host, we try to kind of keep our opinions kind of to ourselves and let our guests talk every now and then. And I'm probably the most guilty.
Aslam, today you failed miserably.
Yeah, what happened?
I failed miserably.
I want you to know that.
But we talked about next week just having the crew here, the panel, the host, just be able to come and kind of debrief some of these shows so that you guys can kind of hear us. We banter and we fuss a whole lot among ourselves, and we thought we might want to put that on blast next week. So we are trying to have some surprise guests. It'll pop in for a few minutes here and there next week. We might have some, we won't tell you. We just might have some that pop in. But that's what we've talked about doing on next week. So,
Anselm,
yes.
It might be good since you're clearly looking for ideas for next week. So, no,
that was actually very intentional. Stop it.
That was not very subtle what you just did. Okay, but.
No, stop. It was very intentional. That was the discussion. That's where we landed. That was with intention.
So I would love to listen next week or some week to some white pastors talk about the challenges of growing the Adventist message within the white communities of our country. I would love to listen and learn.
Yes.
Because see, we're talking about them without them. So I would love to hear how they see these issues, because they're real. They really are. Right?
It's interesting you bring that up. I've gotten a couple of texts while we've been talking saying exactly that. I've seen it pop up in the chat.
But we have to be honest. And share with our folks and with our guests. We did reach out to white pastors to be a part of this conversation. Okay. And we actually did not hear back.
But remember,
I'm female pastors too, and that's the only reason we got here, right?
But remember, though,
that's right.
But remember, though, we need to be aware and sensitive.
Yes, that's right.
It's difficult. The Adventist Church does not provide any practice in how to have these conversations around race, and so it doesn't mean that those pastors who wouldn't come are not talking about race. They are.
Yeah.
They are. We just have yet to figure out how to talk about it across the racial divide.
Or even publicly like this, because I think that might have been the issue. They didn't want to come out in front of but we're so happy that we had Pastor Graham with us. He leads white pastors, and so as a leader of white pastors, hopefully his thinking and his way of addressing some of this may flavor a little bit of how he leads them. And so that was one of the deciding factors. Hey, let's bring someone on who can at least bring their concept or their leadership concept.
Since my name was invoked in these last few minutes, I am a marked man. If you can find online the July issue of the Pacific Union Recorder, I think you will see why a lot of my white congregants have protested against what was written there or presented in the pictures. in an issue dedicated to justice for African Americans and others in this country. But thank you, Roger and Anselm and Dion, for the invitation to be here today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It's been awesome having you. It's been awesome having
Same here, gentlemen. Same here. It's been an honor.
Same with me.
Thank you.
Well, I guess we are just so excited about this show. We thank you all, our viewers. I want to remind them they can continue the conversation in the chat. We're going to come through the chat and engage with you. But thank you so much for your engagement this today. I'm excited. I can't wait to get to see all of the responses that we have on there, guys. This is going to be awesome this week, just going through this. But we're just so thankful that you joined us here at the Pastors Roundtable, where we aim to help keep ministry relevant,
resourced,
and real.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
You guys practice that. That's good.
They're like a trio, man, like the Supremes.
Sounded good, man.